Hi, my name is Carissa Laffey. Today I'm going to be showing you an activity that will utilize the oak motte on the Bolivar Habitat Preserve. Neotropic bird migration is an activity designed for 6th through 8th grade and is best done during the spring. This activity can only be done outside, and it's best to do it in the morning. The following activity revisits a time when early American naturalists were using biology and art to capture the complexities of the natural world around them. For this activity, you will take your students out to the Bolivar Habitat Preserve. They will be armed with a nature journal, a pencil, maybe even some colored pencils as well. For neotropic bird migration, you will need a blank sketchbook per student, a set of colored pencils 24 to 36 count per student, a pen or pencil per student, and something to write on.
Late spring is a perfect time of year to look for neotropic migrant birds in the oak motte of the Bolivar Habitat Preserve. Take your students on a walk in April or early May to identify species. Walk quietly, keep your eyes open and your ears tuned in for sounds. At first, the landscape will all look very similar. Search for movement in the tall grasses, silhouettes on lines, and taller shrubs. Ask your students to point out any sounds or movements. It is never too soon to become a birder. As a young child, Jim Stevenson worked on bird identification in the field with his father, Florida's most prominent ornithologist, Henry M. Stevenson, the author of Bird Life of Florida. Years later, as an adult, Jim moved to Galveston to become the author of his own book, Bird Life of Galveston. Jim writes, April on the upper Texas coast is our continent's most amazing birding. It begins with a trickle, but by about the 10th, around the time of Featherfest, there are usually multiple migrants in the woods on any walk into the forest. Some beautiful warblers like hooded may be seen, but early to mid-April is even better time for the famed Great Eight, the two orioles, buntings, grosbeaks, and tanagers. Mid-April, in fact, is the best time for painted buntings, our nation's most beautiful bird. The other 7 are all seen well into early May. Decades ago, when we had far more birds in North America, early April was still very good. Unfortunately, with many of our songbirds having been reduced in a crippling way by pesticides, cars, cats, windows, deforestation, and other plagues, it's just a nice time to bird. Pleasant temperatures, a scattering of songbird migrants, and some good water birds that drop in, and island specialties like the mottled ducks are very much in evidence. All of us old-timers remember with sadness a month-long invasion of neotropical migrants blessing Galveston with color and activity. Now, sadly, early and mid-April is nothing more than mediocre, but is also an annual reminder of what is coming. Beginning on around April 20th, look out. Not every day and nothing like decades past, but for about 2 weeks, birders shouldn't think of planning anything on their schedule except birds, birds, and more birds. Even today, despite being a shadow of the past, many days offer trees of warblers, often over 20 species, and many other great birds to boot. There are larger species which nest in the northern United States and Canada, with some not seen in fall. Spring songbirds, which are most exclusively seen from the 20th of April to the 10th of May, include the olive-sided, yellow-bellied, willow, alder, and leaf flycatchers, western kingbird, warbling and Philadelphia vireos, band and cliff swallows, veery, Swainson's and gray checkered, thrushes, and bobolink. There are many key water birds that also fit this window of late April and early May, including the Hudsonian godwit, semi-palmated, Baird's stilt, buff-breasted and white-rumped sandpipers, Wilson's phalarope, Franklin's gull, common and black terns. Birds of prey seen in this window include Swainson's and broad-winged hawks and Mississippi kite, but nowhere is the late April, early May status more prevalent than with the warblers. Those fitting that parameter include the yellow, chestnut-sided, magnolia, Wilson's, Blackburnian, bay-breasted, blackpoll, cerulean, mourning, and Canada warblers, plus the American redstart. Another half dozen or so warblers are not included because they may be seen occasionally as early as around the 10th of April. The last week or so of April, as well as the beginning of May, represents the last vestiges of mass bird migrations of yesteryear, when trees practically sagged with the red tanagers or the blues of buntings, the orange of orioles, and the greens of yellows of warblers. If the rate of loss continues, our future generations will only be able to read books on this miracle, and may I count it at the end of my life as the only experience in my days I would never have wanted to miss. When John James Audubon was a boy, he believed that studying birds and other wildlife in their natural habitats was more interesting and informative than just reading about them in scientific publications. He pioneered a technique essential to the understanding of birds by describing their behavior as languages in natural settings. He became America's greatest painter of birds by portraying them as they went about their natural activities, building nests, brooding, roosting, feeding their young, fleeing predators, catching prey, or simply striking a beautiful pose.
Each student is responsible for doing a sketch of a bird outside. Then when they come back to the classroom, help your students identify the species that they were sketching. At this point, your student will then do more research to learn more about the bird. They're going to pay close attention to the features that the bird has, such as the shape of its beak, the size of its eyes, the length of its legs, and the colors that are on its feathers. After that student has done more research about their bird, then they are going to draw and paint a portrait. Your students will enhance their skills of observation and translate what they see onto paper. They are going to be practicing wildlife biologists. Some of your students might find it challenging to draw a bird in the field. Remind your students that they are not trying to be a gallery artist, rather they are trying to remember what they saw in the field when they return to the classroom. To close this lesson, have your students sit in a circle and each present their chosen bird species. Then allow each student to pose a question to the student that's presenting. If the student can't answer any question, that's okay. Give your students more time to research and then gather back together to answer all of those questions. As a follow-up activity after the bird presentations, have your students play a game of Guess Who. Each student should choose a different species than what they presented, and then list some different facts that they learned. All of the other students in the class should try to guess which species of birds they are describing.